Hello, everyone. Welcome to this much anticipated call that has left us all very slightly stressed out going into it. Very exciting to be here and talk about a whole swath of things happening in Bittensor and OpenTensor. One of those things, obviously, is Ala typing furiously. Fantastic. Very cool. So this is going to be a conversation on Discord. It's also happening on the Twitter Spaces. The first time ever. For the longest time, we used to just do them inside the Discord. It was like an in-house homey vibe. And now the Twitter Spaces has exploded, and we're obviously on a bigger scale. We're talking to a lot more people out there, and that's a really good thing. We are building a different type of company, one where we want to be connected with people viscerally. We want to be connected to people via Twitter. We want to be connected to people with Discord. We're all just civilians at the end of the day. Bittensor's Discord uses this designation of the pleb as just anyone that can participate in Bittensor. I really want to keep that. So we're going to continue doing these conversations likely every month. We used to do them bi-weekly. It doesn't make sense to do it bi-weekly, but we're going to host the OpenTensor Twitter Spaces so that anybody can participate. Potentially, anybody can come up on stage and talk. And the reason for that is this idea came from earlier in my life when I was working at Google. They used to have a TJFT thing. And Sergey Brin and Larry Page would get on the stage and they would present what was happening across the entire company. I thought that was really fantastic. But in my first week, I asked a question to Larry and Sergey that was around the creation of echo chambers within inside of Google's technology. It was a very pointed question. I had written it down beforehand, and I'm sure I fumbled it when I was asking it to the mic. But the response that I got from Sergey and Larry was one that was steeped in public relations. Obviously, they didn't really reply to that question because Google's technology does create echo chambers. It does polarize political opinion. And there's not really any easy answer to that. So they gave me a PR answer to a question that I'd asked in front of the company. And I think that the reason they had to do that was because Larry and Sergey are in an extreme amount of power. They're in a power position over the Google ecosystem. And they can't answer things honestly. They can't talk to an individual and give their honest opinion because they're political figures. And they're political because they hold power. And that's not the type of technology that we're trying to build at Bittensor. There's been a couple people that were commenting in the Slido before this call asking for me to step down as the leader of Bittensor. And I'd just like to point to the absolute ridiculousness of a statement like that. How can a project be decentralized or seeking to be decentralized if there is somebody that needs to step down from a power position and therefore govern the entire project? It's not like that with Bitcoin. It shouldn't be that way with Bittensor. But the reality is that still we're in this nascent phase of technology where my voice does matter. I should be careful with communication. And that's because there is such thing as a pseudokey in OpenTensor inside Bittensor. And the pseudokey is a technology that gives the devs within inside of the OpenTensor Foundation the ability to change the code. So, of course, the release of dynamic TAO coming through, you might say from bottom up, from me just speaking to somebody online, reflected a threat to many people and their holdings because this is something that could be just done. So I want to start this call talking about how we're changing the governmental system behind Bittensor. And dynamic TAO plays an important role in this transformation, which I'll get to later. But the primary change with the way in which we're going to do things going forward is that all proposals that are going to be protocol changes on Bittensor are going to be coming through Bittensor improvement templates, bits, and dynamic TAO is going to be no different. So I'm actually going to tweet here in the replies to this call. I'm hosting an image of the dynamic proposal. This is something that will be going through the delegates, the subnet owners, and it will be coming from bottom up, which means I'm going to be making this proposal into the Bittensor ecosystem as a civilian. It's a big moment for the project. It's a big moment for my life personally. I'm going to be giving away my pseudo key. People can reach out to me if they think that they're the person that should go to. And instead, I'm going to be proposing this change to Bittensor as a mere pleb, as a mere civilian in the ecosystem. This project should not be governed by individuals. It should be governed by a system. There needs to be structure. We cannot expect that it will be possible to run this project into the future indefinitely and properly unless it is governed by a system and not by individuals. So that's why the dynamic TAO proposal that I will be linking at the bottom of this Twitter thread right now talks about the way in which we are changing the governance of Bittensor. OpenTensor is relinquishing the control for the first time, where Bittensor can be updated and improved by teams and contributors from outside of itself without asking questions about whether or not this is something that we want. Instead, everything will be proposals, which you can read in depth, and will need to go through a 2 of 3 majority vote between the delegates, pseudo key holders, and subnet owners. So if you're watching the tweet thread here, I have an image that's a slide, you might say, if I were doing a presentation, showcasing how these 3 entities will be governing Bittensor. Without me as a pseudo key holder in the triumvirate, I cannot just force this proposal to go through. It's something that needs to be reached via consensus amongst everyone in this community. Not only that, but the 2 political entities outside of the OpenTensor Foundation's triumvirate, so the Senate and the subnets, can propose technology improvements to OpenTensor without ever speaking to any of us. I think that this is a really important moment for the project because it means that we have a proper functioning governmental system. Anyways, so that's major. I'll be announcing where my pseudo key will be going by the end of this week, and I'll be proposing solutions to OpenTensor forever. In no way am I disappearing, but simply giving up my power as a member of the triumvirate to contribute to this technology as a proper civilian, as I would hope that everyone in this community, everyone on this call with inside of the Discord, contributors we have never met before, can do to follow through with this process. It's the only way that we can make this technology a 1,000-year technology rather than one that depends on the life, the sanity, the intelligence of a small group of people. So that's huge. I mean, I think it's an important preamble for me to go through because there's been a lot of conversations around how this proposal would go through in the first place. Many people disliking it and feeling that they did not have the ability to really govern Bittensor from the inside out. But now that will be the case. Cool. Okay, well, that out of the way, let's talk about dynamic TAO. We did a TLDR. We have a TLDR Medium post that we're going to post here for people in the thread. People are welcome to go and read this if they don't want to just hear me talk. A lot of the specific design decisions about what we're trying to push through here with dynamic TAO are in this document. And here it is. It's posted now. Fantastic. So I think that there's been a lot of questions about what exactly dynamic TAO is and why we're doing it. So I will start with why. Bittensor is a resource allocation protocol. That means that the problem that we are solving day in, day out is how we can allocate the emission vector for Bittensor in a way that maximizes the production of digital commodities. Currently, we use the root network to do this determination, which means that the set of large validators effectively get to choose which subnets live and die, and they calculate the emission vector through a loose form of human consensus. That's worked pretty well up until now, but the system is suffering from a cronyism, a lack of attention to detail on behalf of validators. And this is not because those validators are not capable or that those validators are not good people. I really believe that a lot of the TAO holders that make up the root network on Bittensor are working in the interest of the project. But eventually, self-interest, apathy, laziness, cronyism will leak into the system. And so the dynamic TAO proposal is a way in which we can open up the governance of Bittensor to the widest number of people. If we're going to build a decentralized AI company, it shouldn't be the case that that AI company is permissioned by a small group of individuals that simply have a lot of economic stake in the system. At the same time, the direction for that technology should be decided by the largest number of participants. Anybody who holds TAO can have a say about what Bittensor should be doing, what should it be producing, whether or not it should censor certain things, certain subnets. So that's the idea behind dynamic TAO. At its core is a way for us to truly decentralize the governance of Bittensor. Now, many people have a lot of questions about how that can be done. And we've been working on this problem for a very long time, actually, in the shadows, you might say, for over 4 months, thinking of ways in which we can bring the dynamics of the market to bear on the very difficult problem of allocating resources to the subnets. The way in which we decided to do this was by making a demarcation between TAO that is held in reserve on balances and cold keys and TAO that is used within incentive mechanisms to reach consensus, to mine, to validate. we borrowed a lot of technology from the world of DeFi specifically to make this distinction and create this dynamic version of TAO within inside of Bittensor. What this is going to look like for the future of Bittensor is that participants can choose which subnets they think are valuable. And the wisdom of the crowd can be leveraged collaboratively to pick these tools that are going to be valuable for Bittensor to drive forward and be successful in the future. If people make decisions for Bittensor that are not successful, that are driving us in the wrong direction, the cost is theirs. And that's an important, you might argue, downside factor, forcing people to speculate and make decisions by doing hardcore due diligence of which subnets are producing commodities which are valuable to the ecosystem. And I could go on and on and on and on about the way in which we've designed this protocol, but the majority of it will be posted in in-depth white paper draft proposal that we have and will be linked in these slides at the end of the call. One of the major questions that people had in the Slido was around, will this dilute TAO? And the answer is absolutely not. In fact, it should really go the other direction, where the demand for each of these dynamic staked TAOs should pull the demand for TAO itself. Of course, we're not going to undermine the project that we've been working on for years and years and years. So that's basically the high level. And I probably can't speak in too much detail over a monologue on the Twitter Spaces about exactly how this protocol works. I recommend that people go and read our paper and read this blog to familiarize themselves with what this proposal looks like. But I want to come back to the heading for the call, which was that what we're trying to do here is force the decentralization of this project to maximize the efficiency of the market that in the end will create the most valuable digital commodities and specifically intelligence for everyone who's an ecosystem player for Bittensor. The move to change the governance of OpenTensor and Bittensor in specific is going to enable a larger group of people to take a role inside this ecosystem and viscerally guide it and govern it. So, on that note, I think it would be great to have people that have questions about this technology come into the Twitter Spaces and ask them. I'm going to say Twitter Spaces because it's going to be difficult for this to go both ways. If you have a question you want to ask about the dynamic TAO proposal, please raise your hand here. And if not, we'll go to questions within inside the Discord. Okay, so we might go to questions within the Discord. Are there any questions from the Discord side? ... Well, I guess we did a pretty good job. So one of the important design decisions of dynamic TAO, this is being asked in the Discord, is how they're not tradable. So dynamic TAO could be thought of effectively as stake, a different representation of the staking account for TAO holders. So it's really just a hotkey balance that must be returned to the cold key in order for it to be transferred. So I'm going to bring in Wamba. Oh, we got a lot of people here, actually. Okay. Tommy's connecting, Lion's connecting, Wamba's connecting.
Hey, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Wamba.
Thanks for the presentation. So I'm Ben, representing Wombo, and we're coming from the Web 2 world, but with a deep interest in decentralizing AI. And just for very brief context, we've made AI apps that have been used by hundreds of millions of people, trying to bring this technology to a mainstream audience. And so a general question to you and I guess the community here is, how should a Web 2 AI company like ourselves, with some great proprietary technology and really efficient AI models, think about getting involved in Bittensor?
It's a really good question. There's a couple examples of this happening already, with Web 2 companies coming to Bittensor and saying, hey, we can cut off a part of our company and turn it into a subnet, an incentivized and competitive subnet. So for instance, let's say that you fine-tune language models, or you want to fine-tune a specific language model. We can build a subnet on Bittensor that solves that specific problem. So you can effectively outsource your artificial intelligence department, your ML team, to a subnet, a competitive system, where anyone in the world can come and contribute. So that's an advantage for your company, because but like I said, you can outsource a lot of the work there and potentially get a much better result. So that would be a great place to start. Kawampa, and we can have a conversation sometime, and I'll show you the ropes. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you very much, and good luck.
Very cool.
Hey, Const, getting requests, if you can explain more about how this new approach is going to improve on the current direction. I think maybe we should double into what the internal problems are and how this fixes it.
Right, this is great. I've explained it so many times now, I sometimes forget what I have or have not explained in the paper or in the blog post. I mentioned at the beginning of the call that the main problem that we're trying to solve in Bittensor is the allocation of resources, the efficient allocation of resources through market mechanisms. So for instance, in Wamba's case, I only want to pay people that can reduce the loss on my machine learning model within inside my ML in-house team. That same problem exists at the global level for Bittensor. Which mechanisms on Bittensor should be allocated resources so that we can build things that are efficient and commodities which are valuable to the ecosystem in general. Right now, we use a root network determination, which means that the delegates with the largest amount of stake, they vote through a human consensus V1 protocol where there's trust and consensus involved. However, it's highly permissioned in the sense that the validators with the largest amount of stake weight really get to decide which teams survive and which ones fail. What we've done is re-represented that problem as a market allocation problem that anyone who's a TAO holder can participate in. So anyone can vote, but if you vote incorrectly, you can lose some of your value. And in such a way, we can crowdsource that allocation problem in the most efficient way, which is through market dynamics, a little bit like a stock market, although we like to think of it more of like an allocation system. We strongly believe this also allows for builders, as it's designed in the proposal and as presented in the proposal, builders, people that are truly working hard, will have their technologies watched and due diligence done in a much more efficient way than it currently is. It's permission to decentralize, that's not good. I mean, and it's not great because it's just not possible for unincentivized teams to properly do that problem, where we can distribute that problem and use local information to determine these prices and get a better estimation of where TAO should go. Therefore, not wasting TAO emission, for one, and two, funding the teams more and more that need more incentive and more fuel to create the technologies that they're creating. People that are very successful in this process can make a lot more in terms of total allocation of the overall ecosystem than they would prior. So that's the main problem that we're solving. It's the ring kissing problem. You know, just today someone reached out to me and said, hey, would you please increase my emissions on subnet? Some ? That's not the way that a decentralized system should work. Then it's very centralized around the decision-making process that I have. Cronyism, nepotism, all of those things come into play. We're eliminating this layer entirely from Bittensor. And because we're eliminating this layer, we can actually run the ecosystem in a decentralized way. And decentralization is super important here because it means that new participants can come in. And it's why I'm relinquishing my control, because I want to showcase that as a civilian, I can contribute to Bittensor just like anyone else by having great ideas and having them selected by the greater ecosystem. So that's the answer to your question. Ala, do you want to just bring people up here and you can kind of DJ, MC?
Yeah, no issues. I can obviously ask any questions for you if you want. There's a lot coming in through the Discord, and we'll probably answer it there.
Yeah, you just shoot them my way.
Okay, sounds good. Second question that's popping up is that let's see here, yada yada yada. Will the settlement tokens ever be transferred or tradable on a secondary market?
So yes and no. Because they're non-fungible, means you can only unstake them back into TAO. It's very difficult to create a secondary market that doesn't, in the background, just use TAO. Well, actually, it's impossible. So in order for people to, say, buy alpha with beta, they would need to unstake alpha and then stake into beta. The use of TAO as an intermediary for all of these exchanges means that by the transitivity of demand, all of the demand is for any subnet token is itself for TAO. So if you make a market for USDT to alpha, the intermediary has to be TAO, which means that if there's demand for alpha through USDT, it must go through TAO itself. In the paper, we present an inductive argument proof for this particular question.
Awesome. So that means that, practically speaking, right off the bat, you can't really trade from subnet 1 to subnet 2 just like that, right?
The system is liquid, so you can trade from subnet 1 to subnet 2. It's just that you would need to unstake from subnet 1 into TAO and then stake from TAO into subnet 2.
Great. Yeah, the direction basically is what was interesting. So the TAO still has to be present as, I guess, sort of intermediary in a sense.
Absolutely. It's just stake on a balance, right? So it can't think of TAO as the intermediary for any transaction because you cannot move through any other point.
Another question here is, who will be doing, or what will be doing the vetting process for who the pseudo key will be going into? I think that's probably an answer for the next TGFT sort of spaces that we do.
I'm actually just going to pick. I am going to personally pick who I think would be good for governing in my stead.
Excuse me. As a follow-up to that, what is OpenTensor's stance on why are we not simply removing the pseudo key and switching to something like the democracy palette in Polkadot?
Okay, so someone just spoke on my computer side. I want to repeat the question for the Twitter Spaces, Alan. Did that come through?
No, it did not come through for us on Twitter Spaces at all.
So the question was, why not just simply remove the pseudo key at all and use a different type of governance system in place? So we wanted to create a distribution of power amongst effectively 3 different types of power structures. Subnet owners are sort of like the left-wing side of the political spectrum. They're builders, they're creators, they're artistic people, they want things to move quickly so that they can build with new tools that are being added into the ecosystem. The delegates are a little bit like the conservative side of the spectrum. They want to move slowly, they're whales, they have the interest of the ecosystem in mind, but they're not actually as integrated as perhaps builders are into the system. And the use of 2 political parties is difficult in the event that there is a standoff effectively. That's why we opted for a 2 of 3 style multi-signature mechanism between the triumvirate, which is the classical, you could say, hereditary power in Bittensor, the left wing being builders and the right wing being the delegates. This way, any 2 of them can, at any time, upgrade the protocol without the third. Now, there are some design decisions around how we might perform, like delays and the ability to veto operations, but the basis of the design is to create this decentralization of power and the ability and make it so that the protocol can be changed fairly easily between at least 2 of those components. Yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
I have another one here for you. What happens to subnet tokens from the pool when the respective subnet is deregistered?
Yeah, it's a very good question. We talk about this in the paper. Unfortunately, I can't post the paper sadly, I can't post it on Twitter. It's just too big. So we're going to have to use a different way of posting it. I've posted the full draft paper inside of the TGIFT, and these questions, that are really design decisions, are being answered more in depth and more formally within inside of that document. We will post a link to the document through other means after this call into the Twitter thread. So the way in which we are going to be deregistering the subnets, and this is actually a good segue into, and one of the reasons why we need to do this is that we want Bittensor to have not just 32 subnets, but potentially hundreds or even thousands of competing subnets across the ecosystem, doing different types of things, trying out new forms of incentive mechanisms, we want to have that horizontal scale of innovation, and using the root network and having to force the validators to do the due diligence across all of those thousands of potential subnets is just not a effective way of allocating TAO. It's just simply impossible for individuals to do that work across, say, 1,000 subnets. So when I'm answering this question, I think people should imagine that in the event that this proposal goes through, there'll be multiple, possibly 32 or 64 or 128 subnets that are actively competing to not be deregistered. And what that means is that when a subnet is deregistered, we can honestly say, likely say that it'll have a very low price, very low reserve in terms of outstanding tokens, and also TAO within the pool. So we're simply going to do a mass scale sell operation, which means we convert all of the outstanding token in that particular subnet through the pool, and so holders get the crumbs that are left from that subnet. So effectively, the subnet is destroyed. So there's some design decisions around here and how we're going to make this not a chaotic process. Like, we're likely going to do a 30 or a 60-day moving average over the price to ensure that not such things, and not a potential for a flash crash or a subnet that was actually performing well. It's very likely that the way we'll see the deregistration process occur is similar to the way in which deregistration occurs in the mining networks. The keys at the bottom of the pool are really the worst. And we can safely and elegantly pull them out of the ecosystem without much loss. Even with 32 subnets right now, there are some that we're not hearing a squeal as they get removed from the system. Thanks, Alec. Maybe you can go into the next.
Yeah, that's fun. This question has been asked a couple of times. How will the validators actually allocate towards the subnets, and how will this affect their stakers, basically?
It's a great
How will
question.
the dynamics look?
Yeah. This is a truly decentralization of Bittensor, because for the first time ever, it will be the nominators who direct the delegates into the particular mechanisms that they should be validating. So the delegation is effectively the same in that you will stake your TAO with a particular delegate on the hotkey. The difference being the hotkey is that the hotkey is the hotkey of the delegate. And also the difference being that the thing that you are going to be staking will be the dynamic equivalent of TAO into that delegate. So the delegates effectively attain a basket of goods from a basket of dynamic tokens from all of the different nominators. And this pushes them to validate on the subnets which those nominators have asked them to validate. The way in which the funds are returned is all the same as well. Tokens are just emitted and pushed back onto the hotkeys. So a lot of us will be attaining effectively a basket of good across the entire ecosystem. But at any time, they can be totally unstaked, and you can hold TAO with no risk.
That makes sense. Actually, speaking of, somebody's asking, do I still stake my TAO to a validator, or do I need to buy subnet tokens and then stake subnet tokens to a validator?
So there's not really any concept of purchase here. You wouldn't need to go to an exchange and buy a dynamic token. The dynamic token is, think of it like the stake balance associated with your wallet. So when you perform a stake operation from your wallet into a particular subnet with a specific delegate, it does the conversion already. So there's no need to go and purchase the thing on an exterior exchange. That's all just being done for you automatically through Bittensor's internals. So then hopefully that answers that question.
Another question for you. How does this change the commissions for subnet owners and the validators themselves?
So this is a design decision that we are actively asking for feedback from the community. We can maintain the 18% commission for subnet owners, and some people are asking for that. But one thing to keep in mind is that subnet owners will be there at the very beginning and attain the early emission and also the first tokens of that subnet based on the lock cost. So this makes it so that they actually attain a large portion of the subnet dynamic token just by the fact that they're there first through the validation process. This could be way more than enough of an incentive for subnet owners. It also shows whether or not the subnet owner believes in their own subnet, because that information is public and it's attached to their owner. So people can watch that to see if, effectively they're being quote unquote rugged by the owner of their own subnet.
So then basically, this is kind of a question that popped up elsewhere. This is from Max. So if a subnet owner pushes a bad subnet update and then everybody decides to undelegate, then this would basically really screw up the subnet owner. Is that correct?
This is exactly the mechanism. If people unstaking from the mechanism is how the liquid democracy plays itself out. People choosing to stake
Right.
into the mechanisms is a sign of trust that the mechanism is something that the protocol needs and will be producing a valuable digital commodity, which is really to say that people will be holding it because they value the digital commodity that that dynamic token provides them by holding that token. So if it is the case that people are simply unstaking from that subnet, it's a really good signal for the chain itself not to distribute emission. This is gone over at length inside the paper about how this actually protects TAO holders, because if there is a mechanism that is inefficient, it does not accrue dividends. It doesn't accrue TAO emission, and therefore the cost is on the bad subnet and not on the global mechanism.
Not in the goal mechanism. Okay. Another one is there has been talk that the nominator stake reward will be reduced by 50% post dynamic TAO. Is there any truth to this?
No, that's not something that is in the paper, or is not something we've thought about at all, and we don't intend to do that.
I think there's actually one that is an actual example. Might be good to kind of use as well here. If I stake, convert, or lock 10 TAO worth of alpha tokens to a validator and alpha subnet becomes less popular, does that mean that when I unstake or convert back my alpha tokens to TAO, could I end up with less than 10 TAO as a result?
Yes. And this is the basis of the mechanism, where before, the way in which the root network determined where emissions would go in Bittensor was a risk-free decision. And the risk-free nature of that decision opens it up for all sorts of self-interested behavior. People that are delegating TAO will need to select intelligently where they should stake their tokens. Now, it's very likely that for most of the subnets, they'll be effectively safe bets. There'll be subnets that it's very clear, if you do the due diligence, you'll see that this is where you should stake your TAO. And then APY could potentially be higher than what it currently is if you're correct in that determination. It removes the risk-free APY from Bittensor. Some people might put their arms up in the air and yell at this, but if you think about what this means for the protocol in general, it can only be a good thing, that people have to put their money where their mouth is. And they have to do the work, which is allocating Bittensor properly into the future. That will make all the difference for this protocol and the way in which it really evolves through time, through a much more market-based liquid democracy system.
Will registering a key in some subnet require a purchase made in dynamic TAO and therefore increasing subnet pool, or will it be in regular TAO?
Again, this is a design decision that we've mulled over at length. We think that the decision to allow people to register in TAO or the subnet token is effectively equivalent, because the conversion rate will just be the one that's determined by the pool. So you can register in TAO. Effectively, you could register into any pool with any token, and it would be easy to see from the current state of the pools what the price to perform the action would be in any token. So when it comes to registering miners, etc., we usually open up many avenues for this to occur. So there's proof of work, there's registration in TAO, registration in a subnet token, so that it's just easier for people to participate without having to climb a steep hill and learn a bunch of different new things.
That makes sense. Mog's asking, can the uneducated or uninvolved still have a safe staking option if they don't feel comfortable choosing subnets?
I think that the safe staking option will come out of people allowing so different pools behaving like hedge funds that individuals, like in a sense, like investing in the S&P 500. So you can buy a basket of goods, and there's an opportunity there for people to solve that problem for stakers that I think will probably be solved before this is launched. We may actually reuse the root network to perform this action, so that the delegates can act a little bit like hedge funds and move the allocations around as a basket for people that stake to them. And this will mean that there's a lot more competition in that process, but also there's some easier bets for people. Now, the argument that I would make is that this update to the protocol, should it go through, is designed to accelerate Bittensor in a way that really TAO holders that don't even get an 18% APY will be making more just from the fact that we've improved and accelerated the mechanism. That's the APY that we should be really thinking about, right? Is in adding more value to the pie.
So looking around.
Should we let some of these requested speakers up on the stage?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Thanks for putting me on. I had a quick question. I was investigating to do some staking, for my Bittensor, and I wanted to know if we could immediately want to destake. Is it an immediate process? I know this might seem like a very virgin question. I apologize. I'm kind of new to this. But can we immediately unstake, or is there a period? Is there something that is there a time that we have to respect? That's pretty much it. So I appreciate the time. Thank you.
You're welcome. So to answer this question, right now, nothing has changed with the protocol, and nothing will change with this protocol for at least another 4 months. We are going to be going through a largely organic process of getting feedback, explaining. I mean, this is just the draft proposal, the white paper that we've released for Dynamic TAO. So all of the information out there right now, to answer your question around how you can stake and unstake and perform operations in Bittensor, it's all up to date. And I recommend you looking at the documentation on bittensor.com to answer that question. And you can unstake at any time. There's no lag there. So EGOD, go for it. We got Lion speaking, EGOD speaking, Lawrence speaking. Ali, you're welcome to read questions off the Discord for me in the lull here. But Lion, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just want to, hello team. I just have one question to ask. Is it a problem?
No, please go ahead, Lion.
I have about like a general question about Open Tensor, about community and about its use in AI. And I wanted to generally speak about that if it's the problem.
Sure, right. It's important to remember that this conversation is fairly meta. Many people on the call within the Discord know a lot about what Bittensor is, and it's surely is a rabbit hole. Lion, what specifically would you like to know about how Bittensor interacts with artificial intelligence?
Yeah, like I want like generally how it's connected to AI, and because I was talking with my friends and early investors and like that, but they like want to know general answers about how it's connected to AI.
Beautiful. Yeah, so Bittensor is fundamentally a token economic system designed to create digital commodities using Bitcoin-style mining processes, where the network is permissionless, compute, human resources, any type of digital commodity can be incentivized into existence and pulled within inside of Bittensor to be given to TAO holders. For instance, we can incentivize people to train machine learning models, to fine tune them, to create data, to run evals, to store data, to scrape it, to process it, to create synthetic inferences over machine learning models. All of these things relate to the process of creating hierarchically important machine intelligence. I'd like to think about Bittensor. I mean, a good analogy for Bittensor is that it is a corporation composed of many subcomponents or departments that work on different aspects of solving the AGI problem. We need data, we need synthetic data, we need to store that data, we need to understand it, we need to train machine learning models, and all of these things can interconnect via TAO subnets. So to get you up to speed, what we're talking about here is how we can allocate the emission of TAO to those different departments within inside of the global corporation, which you might describe as Bittensor. Global, headless, decentralized, permissionless incentive mechanism for producing the commodities that are required for creating best-in-class artificial intelligence. Okay, so we have a question from the Discord. Is that right?
Yeah, I do.
Please go ahead.
Oh, you can hear me?
We can hear you, Tony.
Oh, great. So is this live or am I getting screened?
This is live. This is live as all hell.
Oh shit. Okay. So basically, I'm just really curious about, and I should have mentioned this in the community already, but I'm really interested in the interoperability between other chains. It hasn't really seemed to be something that has ever really been talked about. And it almost seems sacrilege, but I'm personally really looking at liquid staking as a means to solve some of the staking problems. And I'm curious what your thoughts or anyone else in the community or some kind of a consensus might be on that if you're aware.
Very good question, Tony. Thank you. I'm going to mute you now, but I'll answer it now as well. So the question is about interchain operability for Bittensor. We've focused primarily on building the ecosystem internal to Bittensor, which means we've created all of the digital commodities that we need in-house. And I think that's been a good idea because we want to be a vertically integrated project. Cross-chain could be useful, I think, for bringing TAO to market. Bridges are possible, but for many people in this Discord and on the Twitter spaces, they're familiar with our decision way back to turn away from connecting into Polkadot. I don't think we've missed that opportunity. Building hierarchical systems, contracts, etc., adding more complexity on top of Bittensor through EVM integration, etc., is something that we will do. It's not something that we're talking about on this particular call, but it's likely that we can talk about it later this year, maybe in Q2, for something that Bittensor could integrate. And I know that there are people that are already working on this problem. It's just not something that OpenTensor is working on right now. Ala, do you want to come back
Great.
on speaker here and pull in some questions? There's a hell of a lot being talked about in the Discord.
I'm answering as I go, text-wise while you answer the other ones. So I think I'm gonna wait a little bit to see more questions come in, and then I will pose them to you.
Okay, cool. So I will maybe let other people up on stage. I like this. Oh, it's Bon Connery's in the house.
Yeah,
Great.
so I think the sort of pride
Are you
of the
still in?
community has been the 89% stake rate. And obviously, I would love to see the ability to
My answer, that it had to be on that end
stake
because
or delegate to a basket the entire subnet system so that eliminates risk. But my question is now more on validators in terms of up to this point, delegators have been staking with validators. Validators have been earning an 18%. I'm sorry, they've been earning 18% of that stake. How will that change with this new proposal?
It actually doesn't change at all. The difference is that what they earn is the dynamic token for the variety of subnets that they are validating in. That has an immediate price in TAO, so it can be unstaked immediately if they so wish. The 18% cut that was put in place as a hyperparameter does not change. They can still attract and attain delegated stake via the usual process, except the difference is, of course, that when the TAO is staked, it must be staked into a particular subnet associated with a particular delegate. So it's a much more directed decision on behalf of the nominators. But everything outside that, the way, and we would use the same map on the chain, etc. So things are very similar. Does that answer your question, Bon?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. I'm gonna pull up Bull, and I'll pull up Resolve. Hey, Bull.
Hey, how's it going?
Very well. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for hosting. I'm pretty new to Bittensor, been around for about, I guess, a month or two. And so I just had two questions, one kind of open-ended, but the other one just on like a basic explanation-wise. So like, for instance, Grok, I know Corcel has been, one of the small products that's been delivered here in the last month or so. It's a really cool tool. For myself and maybe others, what is like the biggest difference between how something like Grok gets its information and why would something like Corcel be a lot better? Like, why are there better outputs on Corcel versus something like a Grok or a ChatGPT? And then do you want to answer that one first and then I'll ask the other one, or do you want me to ask both?
Just give us the whole brain dump.
Okay, and then the second question was just like, in the ideal world, and I mean, I guess I could envision it a little bit, but since you guys are behind it, in 10 years from now, what would be your ideal? Like, I've seen so many threads and so much information thrown around on, like, Bittensor can grow to be, or it can be Google, it could be this, it could be, but in 10 years, where do you envision Bittensor on like a consumer level, not so much like a developer level?
Yeah. If you ask Google what their prime objective is, it's an AI first company. It's a massive 100,000 employee AI first company composed of a whole variety of different teams doing all sorts of different things. Bittensor is a little bit like Google. We're an inside out Google. We're a permissionless Google. We're an incentivization first Google, but we have the same mission, which is to be AI first and to be AGI first, and to drive all of the value in the creation of artificial intelligence through TAO and through our ecosystem. Where we want to be in 10 years is we want to be that scale. We want to be a project with 100 subnets, 200 subnets, totally thriving ecosystems, creating value and pushing that value upward to hierarchically create best in class artificial intelligence in the world. So that's a good segue into your second question, which is, what differentiates us from Grok or OpenAI. And I think that the thing that differentiates us is that we have a machine that is more powerful than theirs, that is composed of a company which has no borders, and after something like the dynamic TAO update, really doesn't even have rulers in the same way that it did before. We can scrape data like Grok. We use Twitter data like Grok. We can create synthetic data to train machine learning models. I think that we can also consume all of those machine learning models into Bittensor because we're an neural internet first protocol where anything goes. If you can pull a machine learning model into Bittensor and incentivize it and it provides value, then that's good for us, right? So we're the collective of all of those things combined. Is Corcell is backed by a variety of different machine learning models and APIs. It's not actually a machine learning model itself. It's just a set of APIs that are connected and incentivized into Corcell. So it's a little bit comparing a fish to a submarine or apples to oranges a little bit with your question, but hopefully that was helpful for you understanding what we're doing and where we're going.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and no, it's very high level stuff, and so it's truly what drew me in the first place. That you guys are doing something that no other project in the entire space is doing, and so it's very intriguing, and I'm just very glad I'm here for the ride.
Thanks, Bull. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Have a good one.
Cool.
Actually, a follow-up question to the validator.
Yeah, hit us, Bon.
Posed before. So one of my groups, they're asking, in terms of the validators where the delegators are going to be staking, are the validators choosing which subnets and then we're essentially delegating to those validators on those subnets, or are the validators choosing or setting weights based on their delegation?
So the delegates, which are the ones that receive the nominated dynamic tokens. So they've been given TAO in previous form, right? There's the delegates, the ones in the root network. They receive this basket from all of the people that are delegating to them. And they'll be able to look at the distribution of that basket and say, well, okay, I'm holding a lot of alpha, I'm holding a lot of beta, I'm holding a lot of gamma. I'm going to validate on those subnets. In a sense, they're following what the nominators have told them to do, because the nominators, when they delegate their dynamic TAO, they say, hey, I'm going to delegate to this delegate. I'm going to nominate to this delegate, and I'm going to delegate this TAO. Sorry, sometimes I mix up nominate and delegate, but I think that made sense, right, Bond? To you at least.
Yeah.
Right.
Great. That was one of my personal questions. So the question that I think people wanted me to come up and ask is about the game theory for subnet owners. Have you considered the fact that as a successful subnet owner, if you believe you have peaked at essentially the popularity of your subnet, would it not make economic sense to, well, if they exit your subnet, to swap back all of your subnet tokens at what you consider to be the highest value of your subnet? And that's an honest way with a successful subnet that you could then keep running. Or the other side of that is, could you actually create a vaporware subnet with a whole bunch of promises to attract delegation to your subnet or stake to your subnet, and then again exit? So it's about the gaming of subnets.
Right. Very good questions. So yes, you can leave your own subnet. In doing so, you destroy your project and your reputation. It's something that technically can be done with any project, right? In crypto, this happens. It's called effectively a rug pull. And this is something that will be very visible, right? Because you'll be able to see this on the chain if people try to perform this action. It's, in some sense, it's the risk that we're all taking by participating in Bittensor in the first place, except you're doing it in a smaller sliver of the overall pie, which is the ecosystem. Potentially anybody here who's a holder or a miner or somebody who's been in Bittensor for a long time can decide to leave, and that affects the price. The need for these subnets to eventually have their own governmental systems and a form of decentralization is a bit of a problem for down the road, but it's something that we certainly want to have, so that in the event that this were to occur, the project could be continued by people that are holders in that subnet. Can you, what was the second question, Mark, actually?
The second question was along the same theory, which you've answered, because it would highly affect your reputation. I mean, I feel that some people will forego, and history has shown they will forego reputation for financial gain. And I think there's slightly more intricate mechanisms at play in terms of being able to scale out slowly some of your subnet tokens as a subnet owner, be it for paying team, rewarding, validate, other mechanisms. But I get the idea of your response. So that's
yeah, it's going to be a competitive process. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out with teams, doing a good job. And the question that you had first, though, was about, people creating vaporware. And, the argument that we're making by facilitating this like large scale, long tail, lateral due diligence process is to select the teams that are not producing vaporware and have people actively participating in that very difficult problem of how can we figure out whether or not something is working or not working. We're going meta with Bittensor, right? Because that process is going on. We're using people within inside of this ecosystem, or as many as we can. We're using the mental power of every individual we can get our hands on effectively to do the process of evaluating these subnets for us so that we can direct Bittensor as a whole. So I expect people will decide to do due diligence on projects, and there'll be potentially even, Twitter spaces for individual subnets going through in the future. Thanks, Mo. Cool. Hey, Keith.
Yeah, I got a point for clarification and then a question on weight copying. Just so I understand this correctly, the movement from TAO to subnet token and subnet token to TAO is the sole determinant of the emissions change, right? So you don't necessarily have to delegate your subnet token to a validator in order to affect the emissions for a subnet. It's only the swapping of TAO for subnet token and vice versa that impacts the emissions for those subnets, right?
Yeah, there's no concept of staking a token to a subnet because it's the process of staking TAO to the subnet that makes it the dynamic TAO, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And the second question, you mentioned on one of the previous calls that this entire mechanism, the dynamic TAO mechanism, would be discouraging weight copying. Can you talk more about how that would happen?
Yeah, it's about creating an alignment between the validators that are whales on a particular subnet and their behavior inside of that subnet. So right now, weight copying is a consequence of effectively apathy on behalf of validators that are like, I don't really want to do the work over here because it's a lot of work to properly run a validator. I'm just going to do weight copying. And I've spoken about how that's not actually the end of the world because it just creates a stronger consensus around the people that are indeed doing the validation. But Keith, I know if in your case, it's very annoying. But the point I'm making is that the whales within inside of each subnet are going to be holders of that token. So if they're not properly doing the validation process, if they're undermining the ecosystem that they are actually participants in, that goes against their self-interest. So the question is, how does this solve weight copying? And the answer is that it's a better alignment between validators and the subnets themselves. This isn't the solution to weight copying that we have also that we want to speak to later, but not on this call. It's just an intermediary solution to a different problem that has effect on weight copying in general.
So do you expect the kind of ecosystem of validators in the future to be much more diverse because there can now be subnet specific validators as opposed to today where you kind of get these behemoths that gather hundreds and thousands of TAO tokens?
Precisely. It'll be exactly like that. So it will certainly create a variety of different whales or different, groups that are running whales on different subnets, running validators on different subnets. By design, that's one of the goals that we have. And I think it would be working for the ecosystem to have that quality. So yes, it certainly will be that case because we're bifurcating the value, and that creates dynamism and diversity in the whale holdings.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. We appreciate you up here. ETH president, resolved. Timo, one of you guys.
Yeah. I had a question, general question as resolved, but I was wondering if you could just opine maybe on how you think about the risks of decentralizing too early. I mean, I know the end game is full decentralization. I think we can all kind of agree on that. But when it comes to stuff like biz dev or quick strategic decision making in like a competitive marketplace, sometimes you see these protocols just get bogged down by too many cooks in the kitchen and stuff. So maybe you could just talk about that and how you think about mitigating those risks.
Right. I tend to believe that marketing is a little bit like a stimulant in that it doesn't last very long. And really, at the end of the day, it's technology that pulls you through all the way. So whether or not we have an amazing public relations department or a terrible one, it's really hard to say. I think that decentralization certainly means that many more people can be pulled into an ecosystem and selected without permission for performing well. Have we done a good job of that? We've definitely taken a decentralized approach. I think we've done a pretty good job of that. Decentralization could be an issue, political decentralization, especially when you need leaders to drive the project home, and make things happen. This is a good question because, at the beginning of the presentation, you're the first person to ask about it. I mentioned that we're going to be changing the governmental system, and this proposal is going to be coming from the bottom up. And the reason for doing this is because I truly believe, and I philosophically really truly believe that the people in power are not necessarily the ones that can do the best job. And there should be avenues for anybody who's intelligent to come into Bittensor and make proposals, do marketing, improve the protocol, and be rewarded for that. If the system is not like that, we're doomed to failure. So it's a necessity that we have decentralization. It's also a necessity that we have leaders. Those leaders can still contribute even if they don't necessarily hold all that power. And that's what we've created. I think, like, for instance, Bon Connery here, who's next to me in the chat, just a civilian effectively that has come in and become one of the best explainers, marketers for Bittensor as an ecosystem, much better than I could possibly do myself. So I don't know if I can answer that question for you. It's sort of like squaring the circle.
No, it makes sense. Thanks.
ETH President Timo?
Just a quick one, and thanks for doing this call. So you've mentioned having dynamic TAO will allow you to stake directly to a given subnet. As a holder of TAO who's not a miner or a validator, am I still going to have the option to just stake TAO and not have to pick a specific subnet to invest in? Or am I going to have to do my diligence just as a personal investor and staker and pick one or several subnets? Or will I still just be able to on the whole ecosystem of TAO as a whole?
Yeah, this is a good question. So there's a couple ways to answer this question. So the first one is that, and I said this before, holding TAO is effectively like an investment. It's certainly an investment in the ecosystem. So by the fact that this mechanism forces better due diligence for TAO subnets as a whole, means that just as a holder, hopefully your investment is effectively safeguarded from misallocation. But the question you had was specifically about staking to attain an APY. As the design has been implemented inside of the white paper that is in the Discord and we'll be posting later, for those that missed that part of the announcement, you do actually need to select subnets that you think will be performing well long term. So there is a due diligence process there, and you take risk. However, we will likely extend this proposal as there's organic feedback from the community. If this is something that people, I think, demand, we hope to, build mechanisms for people to get what they want from the protocol, which would be, perhaps a basket of goods mechanism, a function that allows you to invest across the ecosystem in general, with pools, copy trading, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which I don't think takes away from this innovation to Bittensor, while still potentially allowing someone like yourself who just wants to passively invest to get an APY.
Got it. Makes sense.
Yeah. Hey, Timo.
Hey, I have just a general question. In the grand scheme of things, how do you think Bittensor can compete against potential future biggest AI companies like, I don't know, Meta or Microsoft that have access to large sums of data?
Well, I think we're going to have to go and get that data. So, that's why we have, I think, 2, maybe 3 subnets now that perform large-scale scraping over the internet. When it comes to personal information, let's say, like people's prompts into the ecosystem, subnets like Corcel actually collect amazing data sets. So we can do the same process that these companies do, which is bootstrap our users to attain data sets that are valuable that would not necessarily be able to be scraped from the internet. But we can also get access to data sets that would be difficult for other companies by the nature of the incentive mechanisms that we are building.
How about like if you compare it to, I don't know, let's say Facebook or like just Meta in general, they have so much information on their hands basically. Can it be compatible against them, or?
They each have their own edge potentially. You know, Facebook obviously has something like Instagram. Grok has something like Twitter. And at the same time, though, we have a protocol that potentially can reach cross-boundary and access these data sets. You know, we have, like I mentioned before, we have scraping and off Twitter and Reddit to fill those holes. Thanks, Timo.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna answer one more question here from looks like Cyrus Myers.
Hey, thanks for having me on comms. I had a question. As individuals who want to increase the value to the Bittensor community who are not technologically gifted, what are some examples you would like seen outside of increasing in awareness by word of mouth? What can people do?
Make beautiful TAO art made of glass.
Roger. That seems a little self-appointed.
But seriously, merch, like I think there's a certain aesthetic to Bittensor that could be moved cross boundary into different domains, into different artistic forms, glass, whether it's clothing. I mean, I would love to see that. If I was not swamped doing dynamic tokens, I would be making clothing and artwork that was around Bittensor. So I mean, I would love to see that. Thanks.
I have some, like projects that are coming out this year, rather larger scale than like a couch, like for fungi lighting, that are essentially powered by Bittensor. In the sense of the ecosystem of the finances that it provided. And so in awareness for events that maybe you have in the future or other parties locally, in that way, it could be shared. And it's like, this is brought to you by Bittensor. Are there any opportunities of that in the future as far as like stakeholder parties or?
That's a good question. Well, this is a decentralized protocol. I hope somebody throws a party. I'll see if I can make it. Perhaps you can throw it for us, Cyrus. Thanks, man.
Absolutely.
Okay, so one more question here from, I think the Discord is tired now. We got QNT/T, and then I'll be the last one, guys. It's 6:19 for me, so it's been an hour or more. QNT, do you want to ask your question?
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. How's it going, guys? Thank you for having me on, and the project is amazing. Love it. I love the sound of the update. I just have one really quick question. Did I hear we'll no longer be able to stake QNT, but instead we'll have to exchange their TAO, exchange their TAO for a specific subnet token or basket of subnet tokens to get to earn staking rewards if this update happens?
Yes, in its current form, you can select subnet tokens, dynamic TAO directly or via a basket potentially. That mechanism is not in place, however. But yes, exactly. So it does change the ease of entrance potentially for people that are participating in the staking process.
I see. Well, so that would so people who currently have TAO staked, what happens there?
They will need to restake it.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, thank you very much, man.
No worries, man. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for coming to the Discord. Thanks for everyone coming to the Twitter Spaces. Quite a turnout. We're going to do this as much as we can so that we can hear people throughout the year and bring back TGFTs. Yeah, this is a wrap, guys. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Ciao, bye.